morning as the choir was coming in and singing and talking, I just had sort of a warm feeling well up within me as I knew that I don't know how or what people understand or see once they reach the other side, but I just felt the warmth in the sense that how much Susie would be pleased, not just with the singing and singing so well and all that, but just the catching up and old times and pleasure. How many of y'all at this point sing your church choir or any sort of quartet or anything like that? How many of you still do that? So that's sort of a legacy. And this is a small sample, really, of the people that have come through over, if I remember right, 37 years that she taught in the school system there. When Martin Luther King's father died, at the funeral, there was a African-American pastor who preached, and he said he didn't want to talk about the date of birth or the date of Martin Luther King Sr.'s death, but he wanted to talk about a little dash in between, what went on in his life. And really, ultimately, when you come to this point, there will be somebody that stands up and tries to say a few words, but your funeral sermon has already been preached. And that is by the legacy that you live, by those people you love, by what you gave your time and effort to. A woman came by a few years later who wrote a poem about the dash in between. It was so when your eulogy is being read, with your life actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? I think in many ways, Susie would certainly be proud today. We come today to celebrate Susie's life. We come to worship. We come to mourn. We come to remember. I have been Susie's pastor for the last 17 years, and Susie, of course, as all of us, we have different areas, scopes, and places that we go to. Susie grew up here in this church. Her mother, Margaret, was the organist here in this church for many years. She played piano and organ, and her aunt, who she was so close to, Libby, I don't know if Libby sang in the choir, but I know she taught Sunday school for about 60 years. So Susie, the soil from which Cramerton is, she really sprung from. She attended school right next door for 12 years. Now those schools have been made into apartments. Her father died when she was young, and she lived with her aunt for long stretches of time growing up. Susie was a well-rounded person in high school and in the community. She not only played and sang, she played basketball player. She was on national TV at a very early age. She was a square dancer with the Burlington team here from Cramerton that danced on the Ed Sullivan Show when she was 16, 12, 14, I don't know how old she was. So there's a lot of things about her that were maybe you do not know. Left Cramerton after college, went to begin to teach. Involved in the communities of music. A servant of the church. Susie taught Sunday school class here in this building last Sunday. So she died on Monday. She taught her Sunday school lesson on Sunday. And those in the class tell me that she seemed to be feeling well. Seemed to be, she had cataract surgery, but she was no longer needing her glasses and seemed to be doing well. So, we never know. She also served here at the church for many years as the choir director, minister of music, however you want to describe that. She told me that one time they asked her if she would fill in for a while, and she filled in for, I believe it was 6 or 8 years. So you better watch when they ask you to be an interim at church sometime. You never know. But Susie drove each Sunday from Statesville to Cramerton, and on Wednesday nights, I think. So she drove and was not paid for that. She did that on her own. One of the things that I remember speaking about Susie, speaking with Susie, is that you learn to appreciate somebody who folds their talents in to the services and the ministry of the church. Now, the church choir is not where you don't try out for the church choir like you do the Foresters and other places. Anybody who's willing to make a joyful noise unto the Lord can sing. And those who work in the church, who are ministers, need to be reminded and have to keep in the forefront that their work is to, first of all, to the glory of God and for service. And Susie knew that working in the church, the preciseness of the notes and the timing is secondary to the spiritual act of singing and leading worship. She, in fact, after she retired, came back and sang under Andy's ministry here in the church choir herself, and then often would lead when called upon. I like the fact, and you mentioned this, she was willing to sing and lead people who maybe at times don't sing as well as she was used to, as you've heard here. But she felt like that was her service, and she felt like that was something that was important. I would like to say she never complained about any mistakes, but that would be a lie. She did complain every once in a while. If somebody really didn't do well, you might drag out of her that was wrong. But she was always back the next week. So that to me says quite a bit. When I am thinking about the Foresters and the other people that she influenced all through the years, not just in school but others, I was reminded of the Proverbs 31 woman. Now, that is often used as an example of a mother and of a wife that is supposed to be the example that everyone would follow. But one of the texts in there, in chapter 31, verse 8, says, her children rise up and call her blessed. Now, if you know Susie was not married and had no children, but she did refer to the people who came through in her classes and those who were part of this group and others as her children, and remained in contact with them. And if you get a chance, if you have Facebook, look through some of on Facebook, there's a long list of these sort of eloquent testimonies on the Facebook page about the Foresters, about Susie, and many on there talk about her influence upon them. Be unable to read them, but if you look through, perhaps one of the threads you would see is over and over somebody says, she saw something in me that no one else did. And she pulled and prodded and provoked and inspired me to do more than I ever thought possible. She was an inspiration to me. You see this thread winding through so many of these testimonials. And I think that is a characteristic of great leaders, great teachers, great coaches. We often in our lives, and I know that I'm an example of this, if we're not careful, we settle for less than really who we are, less than what we can do. And oftentimes, a coach or a teacher has to find a way to pull out from us, provoke us at times, inspire us to use whatever means that they can to challenge us to do something more and to be who we have been called to be. It is almost like a birth, working through the difficulties. But we are reminded of the inspiration that we can have on others. And we see an example of that here today. Susie loved teaching. She loved music. She loved students. Susie loved to laugh. She loved to go out to eat lunch. She enjoyed herself. She was particularly proud of her new home. She moved in after her Aunt Libby died. She moved into her Aunt Libby's home and had that home refurnished. So she had, at the time of her death, was living in a home that I suppose her and her aunt had lived in for over 70 years. I'm not sure the exact total, but for many, many years here on Front Street. This has really nothing to do with the funeral, but she lived right on Front Street, and there's a railroad track that you can throw a ball underhanded to the track from her front porch. And in the wreck of the 40s or 50s, a train wrecked right in front of her house, and she slept through it. That has really nothing to do with anything I've said today, but I don't see it. You can still see cold out there, about 60 years ago that happened. But anyway. As Susie's pastor and friend, I would also have to note to you that at times Susie carried along with her a sense of sadness that would sometimes shine through. I don't know that origin. We don't know the origin of many things in our own life. Otherwise, somebody else. I have my thoughts, but I know that God used her in a mighty way. The book of Philippians, Paul writes, "Because of your partnership in the gospel from this day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus." A few years ago, I heard the German theologian Jürgen Moltmann talk about this text, and he said something that I've always sort of thought, but really didn't have a chance to flesh out, is that I believe that the sadness and the pain, the problems we have in life, when we die as believers, at that very moment, God begins the healing of your life in a way where you are unfettered by the sinfulness that you have. So that has always given me a sense of hope and joy for many situations you run into in life. Some really traumatic things happen to people. We can't explain them. Why did that happen? This is not the case of Susie, but I mean, the principle is the same. That often we wonder how God could let that happen, but see, God has the last word. God is able to take that sin, that hurt, that pain, and begin to heal that. And in fact, the book of Revelation says that someday there'll be no more pain, no more tears, no more sorrow. And what that means is the pain we have in this life will be unable to touch us in the life to come, which has always given me a sense of comfort and peace and hope. That pains we carry will be diminished and removed, and we will live in eternity in God's love and wholeness. The book of Revelation says that there will be worship in heaven. So one of the things that we can do here, there's always debates about what's going to go on here and go in heaven, is worship. There will be worship of some sort. A heavenly choir, if you will. And even some of those, I don't know how it works, some of us with sort of defective voices will be able to worship and pray and sing in that way. And at this point, I believe that Susie is in fact more alive than we are, and singing in that chorus, and possibly telling the person right beside them they need to raise their mouth, open their mouth a little wider and stand up straight. I always say to our congregation that grief is a sign where love has been. When you love somebody, you open yourself up to grief. You can live life without loving anybody, and you can avoid grief, but it's a far sadder fate. So we mourn Susie.